Turn to politics here in Canberra today. It certainly has been a big day. Grahame Morris and Bruce Hawker, our political strategist, with us. Very good afternoon to both of you. No term limits here in Australia, of course. You just got to win elections. That's the difference, I suppose, and that presents its own challenges, as we've seen over the last few decades. But anyway, let's talk about the National Party today, Grahame. It should be Michael McCormack's day. He's won the leadership, and I think he's done as well as he could today. And we'll get to Barnaby Joyce because there's still a lot of focus on what's gone on there. What did you think, though, of Michael McCormack, day one in the job?
Well, look, for people who meet him, they'll find him a nice bloke. You know, he's actually quite a big man, so he's got a presence. And interestingly, he got a similar background to me. He came from a little place called Murra and worked at the Wagga Advertiser. I came from a little place called Wamoon and worked at Wagga Advertiser.
Oh, there you go.
The only difference, David, is I'm talking to you and he's running the country. Look, things are different. You know, John Anderson is not Tim Fisher. Barnaby is not John Anderson. Michael McCormack cannot be Barnaby. You know, he's got to be himself. He got there by being himself. Well, from a campaigning point of view, I think one of the interesting and perhaps challenging things is that we now have a new National Party leader who hasn't done a federal campaign, and the Liberals and the National Party federal directors have not done federal campaigns. So there's a bit of inexperience there, and they've got about 9 months, 12 months to hone some campaign skills. But between now and then, you know, he's got to perform in the Parliament. And he's not the sort of bloke who gets flustered. And he has roots in the bush. OK, he's not a farmer, but as a journalist, he wrote about bush things for 20 years. Yeah,
and look, Barnaby Joyce was an accountant. He is, Bruce, different to Barnaby Joyce. He's a more serious character, but when you look in the history of National Party leaders, he probably fits the mould more than Barnaby Joyce. But we've all grown used to, including the National Party, the character of Barnaby Joyce, the fact that he knows how to generate a headline, the fact that he knows how to speak in a way that grabs attention. How do you think Michael McCormack's going to go?
Look, I don't know, is the short answer. He's an unknown commodity, I think, to most people, and myself included. I think he will represent a contrast, obviously, to Barnaby Joyce. Joyce tried to be, something of a renegade and present an alternative that was starting to emerge and continues to emerge in the bush. In the form of One Nation and the Fishers and Shooters and other groups like that. So I think he'll probably be more mainstream, that'll be my sense of it. But at the end of the day, it's whether he can engage with regional and rural Australians in the way in which the government wants him to. He's certainly a deeply conservative man. We all know about his homophobic spray in 1993. Unlike Darren Chester, by the way, who was the first member of the National Party to come out and support
which
gay
he's
marriage.
apologised for.
I guess he'll continue to do that again. But I suspect that we see in him a deeply conservative man when it comes to those sorts of issues, which won't necessarily put himself right outside the mainstream of regional Australia. So, look, I've got to tell you, I don't really know how he's going to perform. I think the bigger issue really is how two former senior politicians, one in the form of Barnaby Joyce and the other in the form of the former Prime Minister, who can actually come out and cause grief for the current Prime Minister, Turnbull. I think that's a real problem.
What they need, Grahame, is unity now in the National Party. Yes, George Christensen put his hand up for the leadership today, but the real contender was David Littleproud, who pulled out late last night. He couldn't get to the 11 votes needed. Look, the numbers differ according to who you speak to, and as you both well know, when it comes to counting heads in leadership contests, you usually only believe those who tell you they're not voting for you. Others can be harder to read. But, Grahame, clearly David Littleproud did well in getting the numbers that he did, not getting to 11. But for someone who's been around such a short time, what do you think the future holds for him now?
Well, it's in his own hands. He can be a good contributor. The idea that he got within 2 or 3 votes is just bloody stupid. If you get that close, you put your hat up because you never know about the last 5, 6, 7. But obviously he had some support there, perhaps some of Barnaby's people. But Now, I think the difference here between, say, Barnaby and former Prime Minister Abbott is that Tony was removed by his own party. Barnaby was removed by himself. And that's a big difference. And I think Barnaby can have a fantastic career for 20 years if he really wants it. But he probably has to just look sideways at the former Prime Minister about possibly how not to do things. You know, Barnaby will be back, perhaps, you know, not as leader, but he could be a fantastic minister once he gets through this period and get everything cleaned up and baby's born and, you know,
You don't think he could be leader again, though?
Yeah.
Well, I don't, mate. The only way he becomes leader is if sort of Michael McCormack and perhaps a second person really flop. Now, that's not going to happen. You know, it doesn't happen in politics. And this one, remember, he removed himself.
Well, he sort of removed himself. I mean, he didn't just happily go. He went when the pressure was mounting on him.
He toughed it out as long as he could.
He did. The Prime Minister, though, obviously put a lot of pressure on him, and there were members of his own party who were doing it. It was inevitable, in my view, that he was going to have to go. It was just a question of when all the forensic investigations started around him and his background and so forth. When the drip's on like that, you know that your time's coming to an end. The other point I'd make about all that is I don't think that he will be in politics for the long term now. You know, he's going to be reduced to a backbencher.
Barnaby Joyce, you think he'll go?
I think he'll go, and it's a question of when he'll go. He may stay on until the next election, or he may even go beforehand. He owes nothing to the Prime Minister. If he were to go, if he was to receive a good job offer from somebody, and I wouldn't put it beyond him to do that. You know, that relevance deprivation kicks in very quickly once people cease to be in those very powerful positions. You sit on the backbench. It really is the backbench. It's very lonely. And unless you're actually like Tony Abbott and you're fomenting trouble for the incumbents, then there's nothing much for you to do. So I don't really see a long-term career now for Barnaby Joyce. I think he'll be out, and probably sooner rather than later.
Maybe there's a job with Gina Rinehart in the offing. We shall see. We shall see. But this revelation today, Graham, that the PM asked Martin Parkinson to investigate Barnaby Joyce. He did that on Wednesday. The investigation was about to go ahead, it would seem, until Barnaby Joyce resigned and Martin Parkinson decided no point in further investigating this. But as a process question, in a Prime Minister's office, Minister's in trouble, should he have referred this to Martin Parkinson a whole lot earlier?
No. The first one is you would go to Barnaby. You know, they are two leaders. And you'd say to Barnaby, what the hell is this all about? And Barnaby was saying, I have not done anything under the code, the ministerial code, that would be wrong.
So you think the PM wasn't convinced?
You would take his word. And then all of a sudden a few other things come out, and a few of them nobody was too sure of, still not too sure of. And then it made sense to go to the head of PMNC and say, look, you know, here's the code. Has he breached it?
The new things that came out were stuff like a sexual harassment allegation. That's not something Martin Parkinson can investigate. He can investigate whether he's breached the ministerial code through the employment of Vikki Campion in all these offices. And we knew that day one.
Well, why wouldn't you go to Barnaby first, which is what the Prime Minister did, and say, hey, mate, what's this all about? And Barnaby saying, well, look, all right, yes,
yeah,
I had this relationship with my staffer. This other stuff is crap. Now, Prime Minister's quite entitled to take his word on that. But when it's sort of all mounted up, you almost needed, for credibility, a fresh pair of eyes to come in. But then it's on the ministerial code, so the minister, the minute Barnaby stopped being a minister, became irrelevant.
Yeah, it is interesting though, Bruce, isn't it, to now learn that's what the Prime Minister did. I mean, does it tell you there was some doubt, some scepticism in Malcolm Turnbull's mind?
It sure does, and it makes me think that he was determined to see Barnaby gone. You know, when you get the head of the Prime Minister's department investigating you, it's not a really good look when it's your own deputy who you're investigating. I mean, at that point, you've got to say, well, it's a vote of no confidence from your boss and it is time to go. And I'm sure that would have added to both Barnaby Joyce's anger and his decision in the longer term to leave that post. I mean, it's extraordinary, really, that the Prime Minister would have to go to that extent to do it. Now, you can argue about whether he went soon enough or not, but the fact that he actually did order an inquiry is remarkable. And I think also we should see the outcome of that inquiry, because there were some important issues that were being investigated, and maybe for, as a reference point for ministers in the future, it doesn't hurt for us to know exactly what the head of the department found. It is in the public interest.
It's no longer going ahead. There is a separate expenses authority investigation into travel expenses. We'll see where that goes. Look, on the coalition agreement, I'm sure most voters, Pam's probably right, don't give two hoots about this thing, but it is important in terms of the relationship and what's agreed between the two parties. It's renegotiated whenever there's a new leader. Grahame, you would have seen these sort of documents before. What sort of things do they include?
Well, have I seen it? The answer is yes. Have I read it right through? The answer is no. It is an agreement between two men. In this case, it's always been two men. And so certainly former Prime Minister Howard, when he gave his word to Tim Fischer or John Anderson or somebody that nobody would see it, he meant it.
Why is that? I mean, not even you as Chief of Staff.
And it would go into the safe.
I find that remarkable, quite frankly, that John Howard wouldn't show you as Chief of Staff.
It's an agreement.
Really?
I know. But he was a stickler. Once he'd given his word that no one would see it, that this is just between, say, you and me, the two leaders, he meant it.
Right.
But the idea that it goes to the Governor General, that sort of thing, that's silly. It doesn't.
Yeah. It goes in a safe.
It gets put into a safe.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I find that remarkable.
And a copy goes to the head of Prime Minister and Cabinet. But it's not the sort of thing that floats around everywhere.
But why shouldn't it? Why shouldn't it be?
I'm even more intrigued now. What
is in this secret document? Why shouldn't it be public?
What about all these bloody factional agreements your lot go up with?
We're talking about...
You have these factional agreements every week.
Well, hang on, let's just deal with this one. Yeah, there's a very real issue here, because this fellow is the difference between the government lasting and not lasting, and it's a secret agreement. Why wouldn't it be a public agreement? I mean, that just beggars belief for me. I'm not being cynical about it. I just think they should be able to, the public should know what it is that is in issue. When they had the agreements between Gillard and Tony Windsor and others, they were all public. Everyone knew it was agreed to.
Yeah, but that was different.
Well, it's to form a government.
Prime Minister Gillard had to show that she had the numbers, that those two people agreed with her, and they signed a document saying, yeah, on the basis of these policies, and so that had to be shown.
There is something similar to that does go to the Governor General, a letter saying the Nats and
that just says
coalition with them.
Exactly. Yeah. They do have to actually have an agreement. Otherwise, it'll be like the Nats in Western Australia.
There's an interesting development on this thing this afternoon. So in Senate estimates, they've been trying to probe this, and there is a reference in this agreement, apparently, to staffing arrangements. Maybe it's something that says the Nats can allocate their own staff. But that may be a way for Labor to actually prize it open. If it does go to taxpayer-funded staffing appointments, maybe that then requires some disclosure of it before a Senate estimates hearing anyway. As I say, I don't think a lot of voters out there would even know about it or care too much about it, but I'm fascinated about something so secret that not even Prime Ministers, Chiefs of Staff get to see. Anyway, Grahame Morris, Bruce Hawker, a fascinating day. I really appreciate your analysis, and we'll catch up again next week. Thank you so much.
See you, David.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with the last word.